He was born into what some have called the royal family of Christianity. William Franklin Graham IV is the son of Franklin Graham, grandson of renowned global preacher Billy Graham, husband to Kendra and father of 3. He's no stranger to the pulpit himself. Besides having pastor on his resume, Will is currently the assistant director at the Billy Graham Training Center at the Cove, as well as an associate evangelist with the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. And we are so happy to have him here on the Full Circle Couch. Welcome, Will.
Well, thank you, Ann. I appreciate it.
We really are happy to have you. We've been anticipating this all week because we've got so many questions. Like, first of all, did you grow up near your grandparents?
I did. I grew up in a town called Boone, North Carolina. It's where my mom and dad still live. We settled there because that's the only place my dad could actually get into school. The only school that would actually take him. My dad was not a very good student, but he went to Appalachian State University. But that's real close to where my grandmother and my grandfather lived in Montreat, only about an hour and a half away in the mountains of North Carolina. So great place to grow up.
Yeah.
So your royal family, Christian royal family.
You must be so
I mean,
sick of
honestly,
that.
you're like.
There ain't no royalty in it, trust me.
But honestly, Will, I mean, was it hard growing up with, I mean, was there a pressure that you had to be the ideal Christian kid? I mean, you had to have.
Well, no, my mom and dad beat me enough where they kept us pretty humble. But I grew up on a farm. I mean, we played outdoors every time. I went to public schools, so you know, my generation could really care less about who Billy Graham was. They didn't know.
Right.
So I didn't have any pressure from that standpoint. But what I did have, probably when I got to college, I think more of that expectation fell on me. But my dad always kept it away from us. Dad did a very good job keeping that type of pressure away from us, and if we ever went into ministry, he wanted to make sure it was God calling us, not the last name.
And your dad, Franklin's a hunting, shooting, fishing type, right? I
Yes,
mean, he's
ma'am.
not the...
We love the yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
I was just trying to get one of those. That's a lot. One word answer, yeah. But I mean, he's never really donned the preacher's suit as his image. He's stayed himself, and just a little edgy bit of that rebel is still part of the flavor.
Well,
Am I?
No, you're pretty much right on target. My dad's what you see is what you get. He's a very honest man, but my granddad's the exact same way. What you see is what you get, and wonderful people, love them both, and God's using them, both of them in a great way to talk to others about Jesus Christ. So I'm grateful for that. Great role models for a son and a grandson to follow.
How's Grandpa? When last did you see him?
Well, I appreciate you asking. I saw my granddaddy just this past week. We took some guests up there to go see him. He's actually doing real well. This is probably the best health he's been in the last 5 years. He's actually, he wants to preach one more time. He's been telling people he wants to preach one more time.
Wow.
So this past week, he's actually started trying to practice to preach one more time. Now, I want to make sure that we don't know if this will ever take place or not. Only the Lord knows if this will take place. And it probably won't be in front of like a stadium, but it'd be probably more like through the intranet, where we can actually hit more people with it than just a stadium. And so we don't know what the future holds, but we'll just see what God has planned for my grandfather. But I think it's great. My granddaddy turns 92 next month.
92.
92.
Wow.
And it's great to see that he has not quit. He still wants to preach. And I think that's a great testimony for me to follow. But, you know, you got a fellow Canadian, George Beverly Shea, turns 102.
In
Yeah,
February.
102 in February.
Wow.
And he's still singing. So he's pretty impressive.
Yeah. But really, there hasn't, you know, we don't really see any Billy Grahams today. Those kind of big crusades. Do you think that was just for a time, or do you think that that is something, you know, that we're just in a different culture now?
Well, there is a time and season for everything, and we still, you know, people say, well, we don't believe in that crusade style of evangelism or mass evangelism, and we're always like, well, we don't believe in mass evangelism either. We don't do it, and they're like, well, no, that's exactly what you do, and we're like, no, that's not what we do. We do one-on-one evangelism on a massive scale, because people always come to Christ. 80% of the people that you ever saw come forward at a Billy Graham crusade, 80% of them came because someone brought them. And so, you know, we work years ahead of time trying to talk to people about the relationship with Christ. So when this crusade comes to town, that everything's been primed and ready, and the preacher gets up and preaches, like my grandfather, and you'll see a harvest take place because all the hard work's been done. People have been engaging their friends, their loved ones on an individual basis.
So Will, who brought you to Christ?
Well, it was my
did that
father.
happen?
When I was about 7 years old, I went to church. We went to this small little church in Boone. Upstairs, we didn't own the downstairs of the church building. And went in there, and I wanted communion. It was Communion Sunday. And I thought communion was just grown-up snacks. And I was like, I've been real good. I'm about 7 now. I know how not to spill anything. I'm a good boy. I behaved in church, and so when the communion came by, I went to go get it. I was like, oh, a little bread, a little grape juice for grown-up time. And my dad said, can't have any. And I thought he figured I was going to drop it. So I didn't think much of it. Go home, and Dad takes me up to my room to explain to me why I could not have communion, because I never asked Jesus to come into my life to forgive me of my sin. And so my dad explained that to me and asked me if I wanted to have Jesus to come into my life. And so I asked Jesus to come into my life through communion. Not that communion saved me, but it was that element that God used to bring me to Christ. So a real special time.
Now, Will, you're our age. Denise and my age. Sorry,
Notice how
ladies.
she excludes us more.
You're our age.
I'm just saying.
And you're, so you're third generation from Billy, the Crusades, that generation. But when you go and do ministry, what do you find in our generation is what keeps us from coming to God, to embracing the good news? Because obviously you realize it's a changing generation and time.
It is. It definitely is. And I see a lot of people that look at the circumstances in life, whether it's pain, family issues, whatever it might be. A lot of people, they see other Christians, especially the way they behave, and they're turned off by it. I think sometimes at times churches have not been very relative to them. They've just stayed in their faith and practice all these years. People change. Music changes. Listen, if you go to one of our events today, like if you go to one of my celebration, my very first celebration I ever did was in Leduc, which is my crusade. So it's a Canadian. I mean, my ministry was kind of born here in Canada. So I love coming to Canada. And you guys have the best beef in the world, by the way, too.
Well, we're actually heading to Alberta today, so we'll be getting us some beef.
Great Alberta beef.
Yeah.
But if you look at our music, that's changed over time. I don't have George Beverly Shea necessarily or a choir singing, but the music's changed. So things do change over time, but the message doesn't change. And so what I try to do is communicate that same timeless gospel to my generation. And you'll see that every preacher, God has given the ability to speak to his or her generation. And so I just hope I can do that over time as well. And that comes from different things. You're going to have a guest on here in a few minutes that's going to talk about movies. That's a big thing that can really launch conversations for Christians to talk to their friends about. And there's a lot of little things, subtleties that you can do just to poke spiritual questions. But the thing is, we need to be doing it. And I think a lot of times we're afraid to do it. And so I just try to encourage, and that's one reason I'm here in town this week, is trying to encourage local pastors here to be deliberate in talking to other people about their faith. That's exactly right.
Because if the message stays the same, the questions, though, I mean, we're dealing, I find, with my friends in this generation, syncretism and pluralism, New Age, lots of questions, all roads head to the same place of God. But what you're saying then, Will, is that if the message stays the same, then that can go against any of those questions. I guess I'm just trying to pull out of you that, because people will say, yeah, I've been to the crusade and I don't quite get the whole God thing. So how do you communicate that to people that have lots of questions, are really skeptical of the Christian faith?
Well, I think what you just showed some of that minor footage. I mean, and you guys were all talking about, the whole world's talking about this minor thing. But here's a beautiful picture of what the spiritual condition of the world is. Sin comes in and captures us. We're trapped by sin in total darkness, and we have no hope of escaping. We need someone that's not in the same predicament as us, being trapped, need to come in to interject himself. And that's what Jesus Christ did. Jesus Christ came and injected himself, made a way that man could escape sin's power. And now if you're down there in that thing, these miners, when they see this tube come down saying, all right, here's our way out, they're not debating, well, which way? Let's try this way. Maybe all these ways come out. No, there's one way. And that was through the person of Jesus Christ. And and if you notice, all 34 of them came out of that one tube. There was only one way to the Father. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father unless they come through me.